Hey, welcome to today's presentation. I'm Dr. Blade, and today we're going to talk about how to burn belly fat. So, here's the action plan. Number 1, increase your protein. Number 2, increase your water intake. Number 3, reduce or eliminate sugars, especially the processed kind. And then number 4, reduce carbohydrates. Number 5, resistance training. And then number 6, fasting. So let's quickly go through each one of these steps. Number 1, protein. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of people make when it comes to starting a healthy journey is that they don't eat enough protein. And here's why you should. So number 1, protein is one of the most satiating macronutrients you can eat. That means you're going to feel full for longer when you consume sufficient amounts of protein. Number 2, protein has the highest thermic effect of food, which essentially is an increase in your metabolic rate, which occurs as a result of digestion, absorption, and the utilization of nutrients. Let me give you an example. When it comes to protein, the thermic effect of food is about 30% versus carbohydrates, which is about 5 to 10%. This means that if you had 1,000 calories of protein and compare it to 1,000 calories of carbohydrates, you would essentially be absorbing 700 calories from the protein meal and 900 to 950 calories from the carbohydrate meal. That's a difference of over 200 calories, which over time really adds up. Just think, 200 extra calories every day over the course of 365 days is an extra 73,000 calories, which translates into 20 extra pounds. Obviously, there are other variables that would come into play that may lead to more or less weight gain, but this really highlights the impact of your macronutrient distribution on your body composition and how eating sufficient amount of protein can help make it much easier to stay lean. So, how much is enough? Well, ideally, if you're someone that is training for performance, you want to get close to 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. For example, I'm 200 pounds, so my goal range of protein per day is 160 to 200 grams. However, if you're someone that has a decent amount of weight to lose, sometimes the protein number would be super high. So what we do instead is I recommend you calculate your protein intake like this. You take your height in centimeters, and that's how much protein you should be eating per gram, right? So if you're someone that's 5'10", that's roughly 178 centimeters tall, and that is how much protein on average you should be getting, plus or minus 20%. Now, if you're not someone that likes to track like me, here's another simple way to make sure you're getting enough protein by using your handy dandy palms. All right, so when it comes to your palm as a guide, what we notice is that our palm size amount of protein is typically anywhere from 3 to 4 ounces of any lean meat from foods like chicken, ground beef, fish, turkey, etc. So that amount translates into about 20 to 25 grams of protein. So say you're a 5'10" individual, which makes you 177 centimeters, and your goal is to eat 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. That would be roughly 140 to 180 grams of protein. I rounded the numbers to make it easier. That would mean if you ate 3 meals a day, you would simply have to have 2 handfuls of protein per each of those meals to hit your target. Simple, right? That will put you at 150 grams of protein, right in the sweet spot of that range. So what happens if you don't eat enough protein, which is pretty common? Well, if you're not eating enough protein and you drastically cut your calories, what will typically happen is you're going to be very, very hungry because you're not eating enough things that are going to make you satiated, and you're going to start burning through your muscle mass, which is going to end up leading to a slower metabolism. So you kind of have that melted candle look where you're essentially just a smaller, more frail version of yourself. And no one wants that. So make sure you're getting enough protein. Number 2. Next, we're going to talk about water intake. Many of us start today completely wrong with a nice hot cup of coffee. But let's think about what happens overnight. We've been sleeping for hours, we wake up, we urinate, and then we decide it's a great idea to drink a cup of coffee first, which is also going to dehydrate you even more. So we start the day off dehydrated, wondering why we need 18 cups of coffee to get through the day. What we should do instead is rehydrate and start the day with at least 12 to 16 ounces of water, and then you can go get your Starbucks or your coffee, because when we are dehydrated, we feel less energetic. Try it. Just drink more water if you're someone that's tired all the time and see how you feel. Many of us are in such a chronic state of dehydration, it's making us so fatigued. And how much do we actually need to drink is very individualized and depends on many factors, including gender, age, health issues, environment, and of course, activity levels. But this is a great way to calculate how much water you should drink daily to maintain a healthy amount of water in your body. What you want to do is divide your weight in pounds by 2 and drink that amount in ounces. For example, a 180-pound person should aim for 90 ounces of water, or about 7 to 8 12-ounce glasses each day. And if we don't drink enough, it is so easy to overeat because we easily confuse dehydration for hunger, and then we just end up snacking all day. I noticed this in myself, so I'm not like making fun of y'all or anything. Whenever I'm not drinking enough water, it's so easy for me to overeat. And then I ask myself, how much water have I had today? And I'm like, oh, that is why. That is why I'm eating everything. In fact, the 2016 study showed that people who drank 2 glasses of water before a meal ate 22% less than those who didn't drink any water before their meals. So that's a really easy way to kind of suppress your appetite and eat less calories, just hydrate before your meal. Now let's talk about sugar. Let's face it, the food industry is not your friend. And food companies are businesses that want to sell as much product as possible, pretty much like drug dealers. And in order to do this, they have genetically engineered foods that are designed to make sure you eat as much possible. They do this in many ways. One way that they do this is by making sure foods reach this thing called a bliss point, which is essentially the amount of ingredients such as salt, sugar, and texture, which optimizes the taste of your foods so you just can't say no. And you keep coming back for more so that they keep making more money because you keep buying that stuff. Another sneaky tactic that happens in the food industry is they add sugar to products that didn't used to be sweet. Bread now has sugar in it. Some yogurts have as much sugar as a serving of ice cream. So what this does is it creates an expectation in our primitive brains that everything should be so sweet. So when you drag your kids to the grocery store and wonder why you're getting a little rebellion on your hands when you deny them candy and ask them to go grab some vegetables, you can thank the food industry because they did this. So what we want to do is reset our palates and get away from that addiction, because if we don't, it's going to be so hard to get healthy and accomplish our goals. I've seen so many clients of patients that are addicted to things that are loaded with sugar, such as sodas, juices, cakes, pies, pastries, and candy. And the unfortunate consequence of this is really poor metabolic health. Some of these people barely even move, and they're so young. In fact, let me tell you a story about a patient that I once had. We will call him Sugarfoot Bob. Once upon a time, Sugarfoot Bob was sleeping. And when he woke up, he was walking to his kitchen and happened to notice that the floor was a little slippery. He then proceeded to look down and realized his big toe was missing. What happened to his big toe? Well, I'm glad you asked. His chihuahua had eaten it while he was sleeping. Yikes. I know you're thinking, that's gross. And how did that happen? And you're right about the gross part. Well, you see, Sugarfoot Bob had a very common condition. He had type 2 diabetes. And one of the consequences of this condition is very poor wound healing and diminished sensations, a condition called peripheral neuropathy. So he had an open wound on his toe and it hadn't healed for months. And he couldn't really feel his toes. So his domesticated chihuahua channeled its inner primal baby fox instincts and went nibbling on this man's toe. That is how significant the consequences can be for over-consuming sugar and carbohydrates and not taking care of yourself. The sugar addiction can manifest itself in many ways, not just diabetes. Also, it can contribute to fatty liver disease, heart disease, and kidney failure. And none of these things sound fun, so save yourself and get off the sugars. All right? Next up, we want to consider reducing our carbohydrates. And yes, sugar are carbohydrates, but not all carbohydrates are sugar. But technically, they break down into simple sugars, whatever. They're all sugar. So what do I mean by reducing your carbohydrates? Well, similar to sugar, carbohydrates do lead to an insulin response, and insulin is not terrible. It's a great hormone. Me and insulin, we have a great relationship. Insulin is essentially a hormone that is released from this organ called your pancreas, primarily when your blood glucose levels rise. And it serves many purposes in the body, one of which is to help you bring blood sugar down by shuttling sugar from the bloodstream into the muscle cells, the liver, and other organs. The problem happens when you do this over and over and over again all day, which would happen if you're someone that's grazing on highly processed carbohydrates and drinking sugary beverages. For instance, eating things like chips and candies and typical snack foods that are around the house and work, not great. Eventually, your body's going to stop responding to the signal of insulin appropriately, so you need more and more insulin to do the job. It is similar to how when you drink alcohol or consume any drug consistently over time, you need more and more in order to get the same effect. This is an example of something called insulin resistance. And in this state, your pancreas has to work so much harder to secrete more and more insulin to help keep your blood sugar down. And eventually, when your body can't do this anymore, your blood sugar begins to rise, and you'll start noticing fasting blood sugar values of greater than 100 and hemoglobin A1C levels greater than 5.7. At this point, you're starting to become pre-diabetic. You're insulin resistant. And you have some decisions to make. You can hop on medications that are just going to force sugar into places it shouldn't be, that will make you gain weight, like most diabetes medications. Yeah, that's a fun fact. Most diabetes medications make you gain weight. Or you can get it together and stop doing the things that got you to where you are in the first place. And that means reducing your carbohydrate intake, reducing your caloric intake, and improving your insulin sensitivity. Now, what reduction is to you is going to vary depending on where you are in your journey. If you have a lot of weight to lose, you probably need to cut out a little bit more than someone that doesn't have as much to lose. Some people need therapeutic carb restriction, and some people that are just more athletic, a little bit more metabolically healthy, may be able to better tolerate carbs and don't need to be as restrictive. But my general recommendation would be to aim to keep your carbohydrate intake at 100 grams per day or less during this phase of your fat loss journey, or keep your carbohydrate intake per meal to 30 grams of carbs or less. Because if you eat in this fashion, most people would put themselves in a position to reverse insulin resistance and improve their metabolic health. Okay? And I know you might be saying, I don't have insulin resistance. No one in my family got insulin resistance. I never heard of that before. What are you talking about, doctor? Well, an easy way for you to figure out if you're someone that may be starting to show signs of insulin resistance is to simply check your waist to height ratio. Getting an accurate waist measurement is very simple, so I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps. So the first thing you want to do is stand up straight and relax. And then you're going to exhale normally. And then you're going to locate your hip bones, and you're going to wrap a tape measure around your body just above them. A good spot to aim for is halfway between your hip bone and the lowest rib. And most people, this is going to be right above the belly button. But, some people got belly buttons all over the place, so it can vary. But you're going to take this measurement, and then you're going to divide it by your height. And if that number is greater than 0.5, that is a good sign that you are insulin resistant and are accumulating visceral fat in your abdomen, which is pretty much the worst fat to have. As an example, my waist is 31 inches, and I'm 5'10", which is 70 inches, which gives me a waist to height ratio of 0.44, which is way under the 0.5 number, which is ideal. Granted, having less than this 0.5 doesn't mean you're exempt from being insulin resistant. So what I also like to do with my patients and clients is to look at their lipid panels and calculate their triglycerides to HDL ratio, which has a strong, very strong correlation with insulin resistance and future risk of other metabolic diseases. Ideally, with this number, you want to aim to be less than 2. As an example, here is my most recent lab work. This was done in April of 2022. At the time, my triglycerides were 63 and my HDL was 43, which gives me a ratio of 1.47, which is way under 2 and quite optimal for me. I'm not just someone that talks about this stuff. I'm a nerd, and I love to do these things on myself because it's important and it makes me a better doctor and a coach. So if you don't know these numbers, I strongly encourage you, figure them out. Remember, knowledge is not power. It is only potential. Applying that knowledge is power. So get to it. Now, let's talk about resistance training. So resistance training is any physical movement in which you use your body weight or equipment such as dumbbells and resistance bands to build muscle mass, as well as strength and endurance. And here are some major reasons why you should incorporate resistance training. Number one, if you resistance train, you're building more muscle, and more muscle leads to a higher basal metabolic rate. The higher your metabolic rate, the more fat you burn at rest. And that's why people that are muscular can often eat more food and not put on much body fat. Number two, there's a thing called the afterburn effect. When you do resistance training, you are burning extra calories for up to 72 hours after that workout. When you compare that to cardio, during cardio is the only time you're burning any calories. Once you're done, it's done, right? So this has a more long-term effect. And then resistance training improves your body composition, helps you get better shape, improves your bone density and coordination. So you really want to make sure that you're training at least 2 to 3 times a week and pushing yourself as close to failure as you can safely, so that way you're stimulating the growth of muscles. Because your ability to build muscle is going to help make sure that you are increasing your metabolism and staying as insulin sensitive as possible, so you can have an extra donut or two. All right. And no, you won't get big and bulky from resistance training unless you train for many years and that is your primary goal. Like me, I started training when I was 13. I'm 30 plus. All right. Most people are just going to get toned and a lot of bit more healthy. Now we're going to talk about the most powerful way to burn fat. And this is fasting, simply because when you're fasting, you're eating 0 carbs and 0 fat. So the only way that your body can generate energy at this point is to burn the fat that's on the body. And another extra benefit to fasting is it's one of the most powerful ways to reduce insulin and insulin resistance, and even reverse metabolic conditions such as diabetes. But it's not something you just hop into. You want to be safe. You want to be smart. So how do you start? Well, I'll give you an example because I can make a whole video on this, and I actually have, but here's just a simple way to begin. So I would first start off by just reducing your carbohydrate intake so that your body starts getting used to burning fats for energy prior to beginning fasting, because otherwise you're going to be hungry AF, right? So if you reduce your carbs prior to fasting, it's going to make it so much easier because you've become a little bit more metabolically flexible prior to starting that fast. And you're already going to be in a state where your body's used to using a fuel derived from fats called ketones for energy. So after you've dropped your carbs down for a few days, then you can consider pushing your breakfast time back a couple of hours. And then what you'll start noticing is eventually your breakfast time will start to bleed into when you're potentially having lunch, if you're someone that has breakfast and lunch. And then you may decide to skip breakfast completely. At this point, you may be eating within a 6 to 8 hour window, maybe having 2 meals a day, and for some people, 1 meal a day, depending on your schedule and what works for you and your appetite and your goals and pretty much everything that you decide is important. And you might be thinking, that sounds impossible. But your body can literally do this, and it's the whole reason why you have excess body fat in the first place, because you can survive without eating all the time, contrary to what your hangry self thinks when you miss lunch. It's going to be okay. All right. And the cool thing and the unexpected thing is that when your body starts to tap into stored body fat, your hunger decreases. So it's easier for you to eat less and you become a fat burning machine. And I've noticed this when I start fasting, is my appetite goes way down, which is kind of counterintuitive. And of course, you're welcome to try longer periods of fasting. The longest I've done is 3 days, but do your research, please. Do it safely. Make sure you're staying hydrated, including electrolytes throughout the day, which will help make you feel so much better. And before I leave this topic, I really want to say that I don't recommend anyone fast all the time or even do a low carb / ketogenic diet all the time. These, in my opinion, are tools that should be implemented for specific goals at specific times. But the overall goal for me and the people I work with is optimal health and metabolic flexibility. And also, with that said, I covered a lot today, and there's so much more I can talk about, but I believe this information today is a good foundation to jumpstart anyone's fat loss journey. So if you made it to the end of this video, clearly you're motivated and you want to change. And if you're currently seeking more guidance and you're looking for an all-in-one customized approach that shows you step by step how to train and how to eat week in, week out in order to burn off unwanted body fat and build lean muscle, just like hundreds of people in my Blade Fitness community, then all you have to do is click one of the other links down below to schedule a free consultation where we'll discuss the best approach for you to help you dominate your goals. All right. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you got something from this. And if you did, be sure to share it with a friend. And hopefully I'll see you soon. Take care.